Welcome back to Hidden Game Stories. In this video, we're taking a closer and more critical look at a title that has been described, debated, and analyzed for decades: The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Rather than simply revisiting it as a nostalgic classic, the goal here is to understand the foundation of its reputation, to break it down piece by piece, and to examine whether it truly deserves to be called one of the greatest games ever made, not just in the context of its time, but in comparison to modern design standards. Because while technology evolves and expectations change, the principles of good design tend to remain consistent, and it is within those principles that Ocarina of Time continues to stand out. To understand why, we need to begin with the context in which it was created. The late 1990s were a transitional period for the gaming industry, defined by a shift from two-dimensional design into fully three-dimensional spaces. And while this transition opened new creative possibilities, it also introduced a range of technical and design challenges that developers were not yet equipped to solve. Camera systems were unstable, often fighting against the player rather than supporting them. Movement lacked precision, making navigation feel unreliable. And perhaps most importantly, level design had not yet adapted to the complexities of 3D space, resulting in environments that felt either empty or confusing. At the center of this transition were major players like Sony, Nintendo, and Sega, each attempting to define what the future of gaming would look like. But among them, Nintendo took a particularly deliberate approach. With the Nintendo 64, the company introduced a number of unconventional decisions, including the continued use of cartridges and a uniquely designed controller. But within these decisions was a clear focus on one priority: control. The analog stick, now a standard feature in modern gaming, was at the time a significant innovation, allowing for fluid and precise movement in three-dimensional space, and when combined with the Z-targeting system introduced in Ocarina of Time, it effectively solved one of the most pressing issues in early 3D design: how to make interaction readable and intentional. Combat, which had previously felt chaotic and inconsistent, became structured and predictable, not in a restrictive way, but in a way that gave players a sense of control over their actions. This was not simply an improvement. It was a foundational shift. However, technical innovation alone does not create a lasting impact. What makes Ocarina of Time remarkable is how these systems are integrated into a broader experience, one that combines gameplay, world design, and narrative into a cohesive whole. The game does not rely on any single feature to carry it. Instead, it builds strength through consistency. This consistency becomes evident as soon as the story begins. Rather than opening with large-scale conflict or dramatic exposition, the game introduces the player to a quiet, contained environment, the Kokiri Forest. Here, the focus is not on urgency, but on familiarity, allowing players to understand the basic mechanics of movement, interaction, and exploration without pressure. At the same time, subtle narrative elements are introduced, particularly through Link's position as an outsider, a character who does not fully belong within the world he inhabits. This sense of separation is not emphasized through dialogue, but through contrast, creating an underlying tension that gradually builds as the story progresses. When Link is eventually called to action by the Great Deku-Tree, the shift in tone is immediate but controlled, expanding the player's perspective beyond the forest and into the wider world of Hyrule, and from this point forward, the game begins to balance exploration with direction, guiding the player without restricting them. This balance is one of the game's most important strengths. It provides structure without removing agency. As Link travels across Hyrule, collecting the spiritual stones, the world begins to take shape not just as a setting, but as a system of interconnected spaces, each with its own identity, challenges, and narrative significance. Death Mountain introduces themes of survival and community through the Gorons. Zora's Domain presents a more structured, hierarchical society, emphasizing order and tradition. And Hyrule Castle acts as a political center, where the underlying conflict of the story begins to surface. Each location contributes to a broader understanding of the world, creating a sense of cohesion that strengthens immersion. The turning point of the story occurs when Link obtains the Master Sword, a moment that initially appears to represent progress and achievement, but ultimately serves as the catalyst for the game's central theme: time. By removing the Master Sword from its pedestal, Link inadvertently allows Ganondorf to access the Sacred Realm, leading to a 7-year period during which Hyrule falls into darkness. When Link awakens, the shift is immediate and impactful. The world is no longer what it once was. Familiar locations are altered, characters have changed, and the sense of stability that defined the early part of the game has been replaced with uncertainty. This transition is not only narrative, but experiential. Players are forced to reevaluate their understanding of the world, navigating spaces that are both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, and in doing so, they experience the consequences of time in a way that feels tangible. This is one of the game's most effective design choices. It transforms a mechanical shift into an emotional one. The second half of the game focuses on restoring balance by awakening the sages, a process that takes place across a series of temples, each of which is designed around a specific concept, both mechanically and thematically. The Forest Temple introduces disorientation and memory, using spatial design to create a sense of unease. The Fire Temple emphasizes endurance and resistance, placing the player in a hostile environment that requires persistence. The Water Temple focuses on control and complexity, challenging the player to manage changing conditions over time. The Shadow Temple explores darker themes, presenting an environment that feels deliberately unsettling and hidden. And the Spirit Temple brings together elements of time and identity, requiring interaction across different stages of Link's life. Each of these temples contributes not only to gameplay progression, but to the overall tone of the experience, reinforcing the idea that the world is layered, complex, and affected by forces that extend beyond the player's immediate actions. As the story approaches its conclusion, the focus shifts from exploration to confrontation. Ganondorf is no longer a distant threat, but a direct opponent, and the final sequence of the game reflects this change, presenting a structured ascent through Ganon's castle that draws upon everything the player has learned. The final battle itself is straightforward in terms of mechanics, but effective in execution, creating a sense of closure that feels earned rather than forced. However, the resolution of the story avoids simplicity. Zelda sends Link back in time, allowing him to reclaim his lost childhood. This action, while presented as a reward, carries a level of ambiguity. The experiences cannot be undone. From a design perspective, this conclusion reinforces the game's central themes, highlighting the relationship between time, consequence, and identity, and it is this level of thematic integration that contributes to the game's lasting impact. When viewed through a modern lens, Ocarina of Time is not without its limitations. Certain aspects, such as camera control, pacing in specific sections, and interface design, reflect the constraints of its time and may feel outdated to new players. However, these limitations do not define the experience. What defines it is how much was achieved despite them, because ultimately, the significance of Ocarina of Time lies in its influence. It established solutions to design challenges that were previously unresolved. It introduced systems that would become industry standards, and it demonstrated how gameplay, world design, and narrative could be combined into a cohesive and meaningful experience. Many modern games are larger, but few achieve the same level of balance. And that is why, even decades later, Ocarina of Time continues to be referenced, studied, and discussed. Not because it is perfect, but because it represents a moment in time when the medium took a significant step forward. So when it is called the greatest of all time, the label is not simply about comparison. Recognition of its role in shaping the future of game design. Recognition of its ability to create meaning through structure. And recognition of the fact that, even now, its influence remains visible. This was Hidden Game Stories, and this was a closer look at why The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time is still considered one of the most important games ever made.